This episode of the Better To podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and Needom, author of the Better To Burnout series, which includes her latest releases of Fairy Tales and I Love You and Is Love Just Another High. Welcome to the Better To podcast with Needom. I'm your host, Needom. Hi, gang. As always, thank you for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. This episode was filmed in January, and it's not airing in January, but you're going to hear comments about the weather because, the weather actually, I think, made the internet glitch for us because it is super cold and we've had some issues, at least on my end, from the weather. So here we are. The weather here, I have about maybe, I think, 15 inches of snow out in my driveway, which, it still needs to be taken care of. But, I'm not going to go out there when it's like negative something or another and do it. In fact, most likely, I'm not even going to do it. I'm going to have somebody do it because I can't deal with it. But that's beside the point. Today's guest, because that's what you really are here for, not for our weather report, for weather that doesn't even exist anymore. You are here because you want to know about my guest. The guest today is Edward M. Lerner. And Edward and I, he is an author. He became a professional writer back in 2004. And he has some stories to tell us about his books, but also about part of his career. And that involved being in the Space Shuttle Simulator. So we talk about that. We talk about what would happen if we had an EMP. We talk about AI. We talk about a lot of different things. So tune in. Hey, Donna from the Better To podcast here. If you've listened to my show, you know that it always sounds great. That's thanks to the guys at Third Ear Audio Productions. Third Ear Audio helps podcasters, broadcasters, musicians, and business owners get their important messages out to their audience. Rich and the Third Ear Audio team are easy to work with. They're efficient and understand that your message is important to you. With quick turnaround and the true caring of your needs, Third Ear Audio is your go-to for any audio message. Reach out to Third Ear Audio at 312-388-5596. Rich and his team will deliver for you. That's 312-388-5596, or you could email them at info@thirdearaudio.com or visit them on the web at www.thirdearaudio.com. Hi, Edward. How are you?
Great, Donna. How are you?
I'm good. So you are on my show today because you're an author, and we're going to talk about you being an author because it looks like before you became a full-time writer back in 2004, you had a very interesting career, and that kind of led you on the path that you are now on with your books, correct?
Correct.
So you worked as an astrophysicist, correct?
Not exactly. I do have a degree in physics.
Okay.
And it did get used on the job, but I won't claim I worked in astrophysics.
Okay.
After I got the physics degree, I got a computer engineering degree and worked at a whole bunch of places, including Hughes Aircraft as a contractor for NASA. So I can well understand why you'd think astrophysics got into the mix. But the main project I worked on for NASA was the Earth observing system. It's satellites looking down at the Earth, trying to make sense of the ecology and the environment.
Well, that seems fascinating, especially with the way the climate has changed over time. So, and the Earth has evolved. So I'm sure that it had some fascinating points to it as you worked on that project.
Oh, it definitely did. At the time, it was NASA's third largest project after the Space Shuttle and the space station. NASA had this interestingly naive idea, this was in the early 90s, that Earth observing data was going to be the largest application of the internet.
Really?
Yeah. Porn very quickly surpassed it.
Yeah, the internet. Speaking of the internet,
frozen on me.
I know. I don't
There
know
you
if
are.
I don't know if it's you or me, but somehow we had a glitch, as you said. Porn quickly surpassed that. I gleaned that because you broke up. So yes, we all understand that is mainly the dark web and gossip and whatever else social media that we have for the internet. I mean, the internet has just blossomed way more than that.
Yes. But to be fair to NASA, this system, the Earth observing system, generated even in the 90s a terabyte a day of data. That's a Library of Congress a day. And thousands of people access the system. So it's a big deal, even though other things have surpassed it.
And I wanted to say something about the glitch on the internet. It could very well be because our high today here in Chicago is -1. So
I get that. I grew up in Chicago. I know the weather well.
I know you did. Yeah, last night when I woke up this morning, it was -10 with a wind chill of -36. I'm like, we made December. We didn't even have any snow in December, except maybe a little bit. And yeah, now it's like December. Really, it is. So I think that's why the internet. Go ahead.
I'd say I miss the Chicago weather, but here in Virginia, it's down in the 20s, and we had a few inches of snow overnight. So it's not entirely an escape.
No, but it's better than the negatives. This is for sure. You also, though, you got to play around on the Space Shuttle Simulator, did you not?
I did. I was working for Hughes Aircraft, as I'd mentioned, and another one of their contracts was the shuttle training simulator. So after hours, when people were visiting at the Johnson Space Center, we had the opportunity to play with that. I'm not sure that NASA was ever brought into the loop on that, but it didn't hurt anything. Just gave the simulator more exercise.
Well,
go
ahead.
I also got to walk through the training simulator for the space station, which was still under construction at the time.
Nice.
So that was keen too.
Well, and you have to kind of, NASA should want you guys to have somebody test all these systems out thoroughly over and over and over again, because the more data you have to make sure that they're properly working, the better it's going to be.
Well, what they would have learned from my using the shuttle simulator was it was going to crash every time. So they may not have wanted that particular lesson. I'm not a pilot.
Yes, but then they can learn that maybe, we don't do it this way. So but I mean, for you, that had to be kind of a neat thing to do, because not many people have that opportunity.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. And that's before I had the opportunity to do much serious writing, but it was always grist for the mill once I started the second career and wrote full time.
So how did you take that experience and pull it into your writing world? Well,
everything I did when I was involved with NASA, sooner or later, winds up in the writing. I don't know any succinct way of putting it other than experience is a good thing to have, and it makes the writing more realistic. I did get the opportunity in my consulting days to meet a couple of astronauts. One of them had retired and gone to work for Hughes Aircraft. So that was pretty handy. But more broadly, being a NASA contractor meant I worked every day with NASA people, and I visited most of the main spaceflight centers. So it was just a wealth of useful experience.
Oh, I imagine.
On the other hand, I have to avoid the trap of leaving everything that I describe as the same as what I experienced, because I left that life behind. Gosh, now it's more than 2 decades ago, and things have changed.
You mean it's not like, you see the old Star Trek show? You look at the old Star Trek and how, I don't know if you've watched any of the new Star Treks, but I mean, if you look at the old Star Trek and then you look at how they've shown, I think in Star Trek Discovery, they take Commander Pike. He's now Captain Pike, and you see his Star Trek ship, you see the Enterprise, but the Enterprise is a lot more advanced. Even though they try to keep it dumbed down, it's a lot more advanced than what was back in the 60s show. 60s,
You
early
have to
70s.
do that.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, things look practically steampunk, and a steampunk starship is a bit hard to swallow.
Yeah, yeah. Especially considering that Star Trek was never, it's kind of like the old Batman series, the same thing. It's that very limited view of what they created, which is interesting because I was watching something last night about the making of the Barbie movie. And they were talking about how they actually went back to some of the tech from the silent era movies to do the shot with her in the car and her transitioning to the modern world, the real world. So they went back and used that other tech and no CGI to make this happen, which I thought was
Cool.
kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, I will confess I have not watched Star Trek Discovery. I uh, am so frustrated at the current world of video. If you want to watch everything you might want to watch, you have to join half a dozen different series, not series, streaming services.
Well, you see, what I did was, Paramount I had for like a couple of months after I knew all the Star Trek was out. So I
Yeah.
watched that and then I canceled it.
And I do some of that sort of thing too, binge on one
Mm-hmm.
service, quit for a while, join another one. And Paramount will eventually get into the rotation, but it hasn't happened yet.
No, and
Yeah.
by that time
Mhm.
they'll have more Star Trek shows out.
The other thing is, and this is heresy, but I don't care, series must die. Franchises get so tired and so repetitive. Now, I will admit I've done a couple of short series, emphasis on short.
Mm-hmm.
So, my Interstellar Net series is a trilogy, and the 5-book series I did with Larry Niven is the longest series I've ever had any involvement with.
But then I have to ask how I'm sure you're totally against them with the prequel to, I think it's a prequel series to the Lord of the Rings now that they're working on.
Oh, that Amazon has?
Yes.
Yeah, they did one season of it on Amazon, and then there's in theory, another season coming. It was interesting. I watched the prequel. It didn't hold a candle, in my modest opinion, to the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings series. But
Mhm.
then again, the Peter Jackson Hobbit series was terribly overblown. How they took one book and blew it into 3 long movies is a mystery to me.
Filler. Lots of filler.
Yes, yes, I don't understand why they did that. The Hobbit could have been one really good movie instead of 3 bad ones.
It's called the name recognition and it's all about the money. If we can make something and lengthen it out, what you were saying about series, how the Marvel movies keep evolving, but some of it is not as, it's starting to get watered down. Same thing with the Star Wars series. You have Disney now that is pushing this because these were juggernauts, these were money makers. But the thing is, by pushing them so hard, you're watering it down and the fans are just getting more ticked off. So therefore you're not really, you're harming more than helping.
Is this a good opportunity to point out that my last 2
Yeah.
books are standalone novels?
Yes, it's a totally good point. If you want to bring up your book at any time, go ahead. So
Okay,
go ahead. So your last 2 books are standalone novels, and I take it you decided to do standalones because you don't like series.
because series must die. Uh, if either of those books happens to grow into 1 or 2 sequels, I'm okay with that, but it's not intended. Uh, Let me actually describe one instead of being
Okay.
so vague.
Okay.
My most recent book is Life and Death on Mars. It's a near future adventure kicked off by a new space race, this time between the United States and China, because Russia's space program is pretty much dead. And it takes place in the 30s. As a wild card, there are a bunch of billionaires who form a cabal, and they have their own interest in getting to Mars first. After the Chinese watched the utter embarrassment for the Soviets when they had to pull out unilaterally of the 60s space race. No way, no how were the Chinese going to do that. So certainly the space race is a big chunk of the story, but beyond that, and this is not a spoiler because I talk about it in the prologue, or the prologue reveals it, the first ship returning from Mars is struck by a horrible plague that is immune to every antibiotic and antiviral on the ship. Oops. So this is sort of problematical. So there's a lot going on in the novel. I don't want to reveal too much more. Between the race and the competition between the teams, both on Earth and on Mars, and then the question of what the heck happened to that ship, and can anyone ever go to Mars? What's going to happen to the people who are already there?
Well, and I want to clarify something. When you said it takes place in the 30s, you're meaning the 2030s, correct?
Yes.
Because some of us still remember the 1930s. Not that I lived the 1930s, but, we still have that weird thing where, you say 30s, I can still go back to the 1930s. But I assumed, since we're talking billionaires and space travel, we're talking 2030. I just want to clarify because somebody who's watching or listening may not totally get that.
That's fair. But as for millionaires who own private space companies, I don't think there was too much of that in the 1930s.
No.
All very familiar now.
It's very true. That's why I said I'm sure people realize it's the 2030s, but I wanted to clarify just to make sure. So what about your other book?
Okay, the other book is called On the Shoals of Spacetime, and it involves an interstellar cruise ship completely occupied by aliens who encounter a disaster, and their ship limps to the edge of our solar system, and their only hope for survival is if the primitive humans can somehow rescue them, which is kind of a forlorn thought since the primitive humans struggle to get past Earth orbit.
Yeah, makes total sense. And I would think that most, there's the running joke on the internet of the aliens drive by us and lock their doors because, we're just the bad news planet. Just bye-bye. So I can see a society that's more advanced than us just looking at us going, they're going to come help rescue us. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Not going to buy it, but I mean, I get where can humanity actually overcome the challenges? I mean, it sounds like an interesting theme for a novel.
Well, I like to think so, but of course, my objectivity could conceivably be questioned.
Since we brought up porn before, I will say this. There were people that actually, there's a person, and the only reason I knew this is because I write, and some author posted this in a group, but there was actually somebody on Amazon that was selling dinosaur erotica. They wrote dinosaur erotica, and it was selling. It had a lot of reviews. It was the most ridiculous thing I read. I only read a little bit, the little preview, but it was the most ridiculous thing I read. But so if that can sell, anything can sell. That's the way I look at that.
Well, whereas I can see your point, I hope that's not the basis on which my books sell.
No, I'm sure it won't be. But I mean, it's just like if you have to think of, I wrote something really strange or out there or ridiculous. Is it any more ridiculous than that?
I don't think I could top that.
No.
I won't even try.
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't either. It's just one of those things where it's like, as a writer, the imagination can be a wonderful thing. It can be a strange thing. So there's always an audience, even if it's a minor audience, for what we write. We just have to find that audience.
Yeah. Tying together several of the things we've been talking about, I'll mention that my NASA background and my engineering background were very helpful in both of these books. Because I worry about things like, okay, how do people continue to breathe on a planet like Mars that doesn't have a breathable atmosphere? Um, what the heck is the energy supply that makes certain aspects of missions possible? Uh, Now, occasionally that also means going down a rabbit hole and learning more than I probably needed to about portable nuclear reactors. But that's also part of the fun of being a writer.
Oh, exactly. I mean, my books are set in the 80s. So while I was a teenager, 20 something in the 80s, the fact is I can look on the internet for some things, but there's other things on the internet that are not there any longer. So I go online and I find used travel guides for places that I want to write about. So I can get those restaurants. And I know that's not the same exact thing, but it's still going down that rabbit hole of let me dig and see what I can find to make this authentic.
Yeah. Now, occasionally I encounter a book where the amount of detail in it is crushing. And that's what I describe as I suffered to do the research for the book. Now it's your turn.
Well, there's a good story, good movie about that actually, Wonder Boys, with Michael Douglas. It's an older movie, and he's a writer. And Katie Holmes is sitting there in a scene telling him, did you have to include all of the heritage and family line of every horse that you wrote about in the book? You could have not put that in there. You didn't have to have that whole long diatribe. It really takes away from the book. But that's the same things as writers. We have to make that decision of what is too much information, but what is enough information to have the audience understand that it's believable.
Yes, I have learned that if there's a review that describes something as lush, it really means overblown detail.
I never thought about it that way, but I guess that would make sense. I mean, lush would be a lot of vegetation. So when you think of it, it's a polite way of saying overgrowth. So it's a more beautified way of saying overgrowth.
It is polite.
Mm-hmm. So how do you feel? I mean, do you read your reviews?
Uh, I try not to, but I'm human.
But I mean, I don't know how, I mean, for me, I have to use reviews occasionally to market my books. So it's one of those things that it's a necessary evil that, there's a big thing on social media saying reviews are for readers, they're not for the authors. But we need to use them for marketing occasionally.
Well, there are two kinds of reviews. So if it's a review from a formal review outlet, if library, journal, or Publishers Weekly, or Locus, or a major magazine in the genre does a review, of course I want to be familiar with that and see if there's a good blurb. But looking at every Goodreads or Amazon review is not a productive use of my time.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And I mean, that's kind of where the big drama has been, because some people, Goodreads has now and Amazon has been subject to the same thing, that there are people that are going in and just, dare I say, bombing people with a negative review or a negative just a 1 star just to knock down their ratings. And this was something going on with Facebook author groups, that the competition for other authors, they were going in there and knocking down, putting a 1 star review or 1 star rating, not leaving a review, and then turning around and going on Facebook and some of these groups saying, yeah, guess what I just did to such and such. I mean, which is totally juvenile in high school. And why would you do that?
Well, unfortunately, some people are jerks.
Mm, bad actors, all of the above. So I want to talk to you a little bit about small miracles. So medical nanotech.
Okay.
So
Small Miracles deals with a guy, I think his name is Brent Cleary, but that's one of my older books, so I'm not sure I got the name right. But this character is sort of a happy-go-lucky sales engineer. He goes on a sales call to demonstrate some technology. The sales call is in a police cop car. And he's demonstrating safety equipment, which is nanotech hardened armor and emergency first aid nanotech. Well, as it happens, there's a horrible accident, a gas pipeline explosion while he's on this ride along. He's the only survivor in a fairly large distance because of this equipment. The nanotech has saved him. Everyone notices he's different after this incident, and most people chalk it up to a near-death experience as something that's going to change a person. But what comes out even early in the book, so this is not going to be a big spoiler, is that the nanites in the first aid feature of this kit that were supposed to be purged from his system were not, for good reasons, which take a while to sort out. And the nanites are taking him over.
Okay. So, and I guess the reason I brought this book up is because we have seen technology advance and we've seen technology grow. Do you eventually think that nanobots or nanobites will eventually help in curing people?
I do think that there already is nanotech in medicine for precision delivery of medicine. There are little nanoparticles that are magnetized, and this is a research thing, but it's being done in labs where external magnets are used to drag these nanoparticles to exactly the spot that needs to be treated, and then as the particle dissolves, it precision releases the medicine to exactly where it's needed. This is a more modest version of the nanites in my book, which are self-propelled, and they sense injury markers in the bloodstream and just swim in the direction of wherever the biomarkers are coming from.
You also have a book called Fool's Experiment. And now that AI has become such a big thing, I would think that this book, because you say, it has AI in it, I would think that that would be a bigger discussion for you as far as a topic, because AI now is the hot button. So are you going to re-release this book since it's dealing with that subject?
I hadn't thought about that, but it's not a bad idea. So Fool's Experiment deals with the somewhat accidental development of a general artificial intelligence. General AI is a form of AI that is supposed to be able to handle all the kinds of problems that a person can instead of being very specialized in its uses. So until the last year or so, AIs were very specialized for image recognition or speech recognition. The chatbots that have come out in the last year or so are purported to be general AIs. They're not, although they're a little bit closer. I've done some testing of Chat GPT and Bard and a couple of the others, asking them questions for which I absolutely know the answer, like, what are some of the books written by science fiction author Edward M. Lerner? I figure I'm authoritative on the subject. And these AIs, supposed intelligences, aren't bright enough to properly look at Wikipedia or my website and Amazon, and they miss some of the books I have written and give me credit for books I have not.
Go ahead.
They've told me I've won awards I haven't won. Weird things. I asked for a plot summary, and it got that semi-wrong. The other thing I'll say about AI, since I seem to be in ranting mode all of a sudden, is that the training sets that these large language models use are taking unfair advantage of us authors.
Yeah.
The companies that are producing these things just scrape all sorts of information off the internet, including pirated copies of books. And there are other tools that reverse engineer what the training sets were. And it appears that at least 5 of my books have been used without permission to train one of the AIs.
Wow. And there's a big thing, like, because I am self-published, when you go to Amazon to upload your book, they do ask if anything of your book has been used with AI. Like, there's this checkbox. Okay, if somebody's done an AI book, which
Yeah.
there have been numerous. I mean, people have complained about this on Amazon, that there's been numerous AI books that are just bad that have gotten through. But a checkbox is not going to necessarily stop anybody. What are you going to do? Take their account down, and then they'll relaunch. If they're a scammer, they're going to relaunch another account.
Yeah, they'll just have a new pen name.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, if someone is so sleazy that they're going to try to foist off an AI written book as something creative, I'm not going to trust them to be honest about checkboxes.
No. The only real experience I've done with AI is I was messing around on Canva with their AI for some pictures, because I write in the 80s. People don't really, when I'm looking for cover art and stuff, which I don't even have a person on my cover, they don't have mullets, which is fine. But I mean, they don't have the same hairstyles as they did back then. So I was messing around with the AI, and some of the pictures were okay, but I had some where they had like an extra arm on the girl. The guy was part of the motorcycle. It was just over the top. I'm like, so I was sharing them as AI fail because it was rather amusing. But I mean, there is a big issue of how do we use AI? And then of course, then there's the doom and gloom of AI, of the movies War Games and Terminator and all those darker sides of AI. So it's like, we need to be careful with it. And I think recently, I think it was Tennessee, actually passed a bill or passed a law saying you cannot use AI in voice work. That there is, but how are you going to tell? Eventually, it's all going to be so commonplace, and that's where we get really scary. And I know that's not where this conversation was intended to go, but it's very easy then to create propaganda, and that's what's scary.
Deep fakes are getting better and better.
Mm-hmm.
It's widely anticipated that the elections this fall are going to be the first major deep fake election.
Mm-hmm. And, go ahead.
It's not an encouraging situation.
No, but here's something interesting, and I talk about this a lot. And it's a movie that was it wasn't very widely received well, but it was a movie with Dustin Hoffman called Wag the Dog. And that was before AI or anything else. And it was talking about how they created this fake war to build up propaganda to get support. And the amusing thing is, now we're going to have AI that's going to create whatever they want us to see. And I don't know, I'm not saying who it is. I'm not talking conspiracy, but we don't know who's going to create all the propaganda. So it's got to be up to us to really look at what the truth is.
It's a very serious problem. And I will admit I'm not terribly optimistic about how well people will do at filtering out fakes from reality.
No.
Yeah. News consumption is very siloed, and people are very inclined to just believe that which reinforces the mindset that brought them to their particular silo.
Well, and it's also it's more about, and I'm not talking necessarily for the people, but for the companies that put the news out, it's become more infotainment. I need the ratings. So what will give me the ratings? What will give me the views? Oh, this goes back to your point. You're skewing this way. Okay, so we have to create the stories that are darker in this way, and we have to paint this picture of doom and gloom because you're feeding on that. and you're feeding over here on hope and change and everything else. So we'll paint that picture for you over here.
Yeah. Although I don't see a lot of hopeful stories in the news.
No,
They
but
don't seem to attract eyeballs.
no, but you understand what I'm saying. And then of
Yeah.
course you have the whole group of people that are looking on TikTok for their news.
Well, TikTok or Comedy Central or
Yeah.
Last Week Tonight.
Yeah.
Yes, all the notion of getting news from non-news venues is not encouraging.
No, but I will say with John Oliver, his show, he does make some interesting points about certain things. He does usually do a nice job of laying it all out in a good way.
I find him amusing. But that's about all I get out of the show.
Understand.
Yeah.
I mean, we are going to be in for an interesting time, and you did not come on to talk politics, and I did not mean to go there. It's just when we're talking about AI, it's just something that it bleeds into because we all see it's coming.
Okay. Well, I didn't consider this politics because we very carefully have said nothing about the nature of any silo.
Right. I just didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. That's why I brought that up. So,
That's
but
fair.
um so when we look at energize with the solar power satellites, we're kind of already there, aren't we? I mean, Elon Musk has launched how many satellites into orbit now?
Well, Elon Musk's satellites are for communications.
Right.
The premise of Energized, which has a story kicked off by Russian meddling leading to an energy crisis. What are the chances? Is that a solution to this is a technology called solar power satellites. We have solar power on Earth right now, but it's not as efficient as it could be because, there are things like night and rain and snow. And the areas that are the best locations for gathering solar power, like deserts, are not necessarily near the cities like Chicago that could use some extra energy right about now. If you put the same solar cells in space in a proper orbit, they get sunlight 24/7. That's a slight exaggeration, but I'll skip the caveat. So the solar power satellite in Energized, which is a prototype technology, is a couple of miles square. Since the Russians in the story have caused this energy crisis for their own purposes, since they still want to sell oil, they don't want the solar power satellites to succeed. So the book deals with their devious plan to make that technology untenable, to sabotage it. There are some small-scale experiments with solar power satellites. Oh, the detail I left out is, fine, you have all this power in space. You still have to get it to the ground. And you get it to the ground by beaming energy, which can be done with lasers or microwaves because the atmosphere is basically transparent to them. But if you have this gigawatt power station in the sky and it's got to deliver that gigawatt to the ground, that's an awful lot of energy to be used or misused.
Yeah.
The experiments that are being done with this technology now deal with watts, not billions of watts. But yes, people are looking at this right now.
And I mean, that's a big thing to deal with when you really think about the energy crisis, because it is possible that we would have an energy crisis. And that kind of goes back to the AI thing. I mean, as we build technology, we end up putting things on computerized avenues. Some things I know still have not been transferred over, and that makes sense. They're still running analog, but a lot of things have already been transferred over. So somebody could hack into these systems. So once again, we're back to war games, because if they're hackable, somebody could do that just for giggles and grins, not really caring about the outcome.
Oh, absolutely. The automation and computer management of resources uh, creates a big exposure. And since I spent a lot of time as a computer engineer, uh, that sort of factor crops up a lot in stories and books that I write. On the other hand, I have a real aversion to stories, especially on TV, where the writers are very lazy and it's absolutely simple to hack into everything.
Yes. And then here's the other caveat. How how devastated would we be if an EMP goes off?
Very,
Mhm. Mhm.
very little of the infrastructure is hardened against that sort of thing.
Right. And I mean most people don't even realize, yeah, your car, oh, I'll be okay. I have a car. No, you won't. Unless you have something that has no computers in it, you're done.
Well, it depends a lot on
Electronics.
whether your gadget is running at the time.
True. I would that could be true, yes.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember a movie called Broken Arrow,
Vaguely.
where where John Travolta is scheming to steal nuclear warheads to sell to whoever might buy them.
Hmm.
And just to show he's serious, he sets off an EMP. So he turns his car off just before the EMP goes off.
Ah.
So all the people chasing him are stopped dead by that, and then he can just restart his car and drive away.
So, in other words, that if we knew this was coming, then we could just turn everything off and then everything would be okay. Yes and no.
And for many things, yes. The astrophysical example that's similar is a big enough solar flare or coronal mass ejection that came straight at us uh, would have the same sort of effects as an EMP. Because all these charged particles slamming into the atmosphere produce similar effects.
And they do talk a lot about that. I've seen some people talking about that lately, that we've had some of those happening lately with the coronal release of this energy. So, and that's when sometimes they're saying that our tech is screwing up because of these things happening. Say, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm
These things do happen. I don't think there has been a widespread outage caused by such things since the 1960s. There was a solar flare that caused a cascading power outage in Canada that propagated into New England. But things are a little bit more robustly built since then.
hopefully, I would hope. Do you think do you think if we had something like that happen, if somebody released an EMP, how bad would that affect the power grid, and how bad would that affect long term the inevitability of our society? I mean, how quick could we get that back on, and would it be totally devastated?
Well, it depends how big an EMP and how high above the Earth's surface it was when it went off, because the propagation of the effects is going to vary with both of those factors. So, one localized EMP would be a regional disaster, but it wouldn't end civilization.
Kind of like Fukushima, or not Fukushima. Lovely. Russia.
Tunguska, the
No, it was where the power plant went out, and now there's nothing there really but overgrowth and stray animals.
Chernobyl.
Yes, thank you. I could not think of Chernobyl to save
Okay,
my life.
that's in Ukraine.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a localized problem. And the serious effects there were not from an
No.
EMP, which fries electronics. It was
Right.
just old-fashioned radiation poisoning, like from above ground A-bomb testing.
Right. And I mean,
You take,
I understood that wasn't any, but it was just the devastation of a localized event. That's where I was going with that with Chernobyl. So
yeah, an EMP. I guess we should maybe spell that out for listeners who aren't familiar with the term electromagnetic pulse. An atomic bomb releases a whole bunch of charged particles and electromagnetic radiation that can seriously mess up electronics. And how messed up they get, as I mentioned, depends on whether devices are powered at the time or not. But absolutely, an electromagnetic pulse from a bomb of big enough size that set off high in the atmosphere could destroy networks, power grids, and telephone networks and internet uh, over a large chunk of the country.
but but then we can go back to this. And I don't even know why we're on this topic, but then you can go back to this. One hack into a power grid can do the same thing.
Um, I'm
One
less
major hack.
concerned about that.
Okay.
I mean, there's the power grid in this country is not centrally managed, which is both a strength and a weakness. Its ownership is distributed over many, many, many organizations, some public, some private. And because of that fragmentation, there's a lot of heterogeneity in the equipment. So a hack that affects one company won't necessarily propagate to another company.
But many hacks.
It would take many hacks. And a lot of systems have fail soft modes.
Well, go ahead.
So something that's fail safe or fail soft will have at least semi-graceful degradation. You lose some modes of operation, but not others. One of the pluses of the move towards solar power is over time, the grid is going to become more resilient because the generation of power is going to be more distributed. And a lot of neighborhoods are experimenting with microgrids that, if need be, can cut themselves off completely from the main power grid and keep providing power. So if you're in a neighborhood where the houses have solar cells on the roof, or you're in an office building with solar cells on the roof, the time is coming, not too far from now, when they'll be self-contained. If the grid crashes, they'll lose their ability to get peak power from elsewhere or to sell their peak power to elsewhere, but essential functions will stay online.
Which is important. Go ahead.
No, I think I was done.
Okay. I mean, why I asked that question was because they've talked about that if we have another world war, which I hope to God we don't, but if we were, it's not going to be the wars that we've thought. It's going to be more through computer and cyber, and we still may have the bloody bombs and everything else, but there's more chance of taking down a country now cyberly than there is otherwise.
2 years ago, I would have agreed with you.
Okay.
But the way the Ukraine war is being fought has comparatively little cyber component to it.
Sure.
Russia tried to take down a privately owned satellite communication network called Viasat at the very beginning of the war because the Ukrainians were using it. And the network came back online almost instantly. The Russians keep bombing the Ukrainian power grid because they have to. If they could hack into it and take it down that way, I'm sure they would.
True.
So there are cyber attacks going on. There's no doubt about it. But apparently people have learned to harden their cyber resources a whole lot more than they were a few years ago. I think between the way the Russians took down the Estonian online infrastructure in 2007 and the way, without attribution, the US and Israel took down the Iranian nuclear enrichment program in, I think it was 2010 with the Stuxnet virus, that was an eye-opener to a whole bunch of countries that if it's a critical resource, you better harden it.
Okay. And I mean, sorry for my naivety, but it's just one of those things where it's like, overall, over time you hear these things and it's like, how do you get clarification? I am not a computer expert. And so they're having the ability to talk to someone of your stature and your background. You can clear up some misconceptions, not only for me, but maybe for a listener that has that idea that, maybe the next one is the cyber crimes or cyber war instead of the actual physical. So I'm glad that we actually got to breach that subject.
Okay. It's not that we don't have to be careful because every other kinds of arms race, there is a cyber arms race, but it isn't necessarily going to be a cyber Armageddon.
What do you think about the fact that about space?
It's big, really, really big.
Well, I mean, do you think we need to have a space militia? I guess that's my question. Because I mean, I know a certain person put that whole thing together that we were going to have a space force. Do you really see a need for a space force at this time?
I do. Whether it needed to be a brand new service distinct from the Air Force, I don't have any strong opinions on one way or another. But the American way of war is heavily dependent on space assets. If GPS went down, smart weapons wouldn't be smart anymore. We wouldn't, if the military communication networks went down, we wouldn't be able to communicate overseas. If the early warning satellites went down, we wouldn't know if something unfortunate were being lobbed over the pole at us.
True.
So all of that means we have assets that have to be defended. The Russians and the Chinese have both tested various forms of anti-satellite weapons. And those range from physical destruction to lasers to blind things, to blind satellites, to maneuverable satellites that could come up to another country's satellite and somehow physically disable it. So given all of that, it's hard to imagine that we don't need some form of space protection. I think the argument for making it a separate service is that it requires comparatively few people to manage the resources that are used to launch and monitor these space assets. And those relatively few resources were kind of orphans within the overall Air Force. The Air Force is sort of prone to its historical purpose of guys flying airplanes.
Top Gun?
Yeah. And I use guys generically because obviously now there are women pilots. But even getting the bulk of the Air Force to embrace, maybe it's time to do away with piloted aircraft and go with all drones.
Yeah, that wouldn't go.
Yeah, it's an even bigger jump to have them deal with space.
Well,
that was all a long rambling way of saying, answering your question. Yes, I think some version of a space force was on time.
No, it's fine. And here's the interesting thing, as we're talking about pilots and everything, they're coming out with another Top Gun movie. They're talking about making another one. So there you go, which actually made me, when you were talking a question
Mhm.
came to mind of, and I know we talked about you don't like series,
Series
but
must die.
yeah, the Mission Impossible movies. Do you ever
I
have you? Go ahead.
I watched the first few,
Hmm.
loved the first one, liked the second one. I think I gave up on the third one.
I think they're on 8 or 9 now.
Yeah.
The only reason I asked is because I know that they're very tech savvy. And I mean, do you watch a movie? For me as a writer, I usually can figure out what's happening, who's going to be the killer or whatever, if I'm watching a crime show, way before we get to even
Mhm.
close to trying to solve it. So for you, when you watch something that has a lot of tech in it, how do you feel about that? Do you sit there and go, this is not the way? I mean, you said something about the people being able to hack, but let's take
Mhm.
away from that the other tech that is out there that is in the visual field in a movie or a television show. Do you ever sit there and go, that's not how that works?
Yes, when my wife and I are watching shows, I will often say pause because she is the queen of the remote. And I'll rant a little bit about what ridiculosity was on the screen. And she will sometimes say, will you shut up and let me enjoy the show? But I am told this is endemic for every profession. Lawyers will do the same thing for legal dramas, and law enforcement people will do the same thing for police procedurals.
When I because I used to work in insurance and I still have that bad propensity. If I'm out in public and I see something that is going to be a liability for somebody, I will usually say something. I have to stop myself and like, you don't do that anymore. You're not supposed to be doing that. But I have a bad propensity to it's occupational hazard. The worst was when I was still doing the job. I went to the store to pick up something and I was sick as a dog. And there was lipstick. Somebody had smeared lipstick on the floor. It was like there and something for somebody to slip on. And I'm like, we need to find a manager. And my husband's like, what? I'm like, we need to find a manager. Somebody's going to hurt themselves. He's like, you're sick. You've been throwing up and you want to, no, we need to get this taken care of. And he's like, only you. So, I mean, I get it. I get it. And yeah, he would get annoyed with me because I'd sit there and blurt out who I thought the killer was. And he's like, yeah, okay, ruin it for me already. I'm like, I'm sorry, it
Mhm.
happens because I used to do a lot of investigation as an insurance adjuster. So,
Well, and as writers, we're trained to spot uh, the shotgun over the mantle.
mhm, indeed,
Yes, yes. Was
indeed,
it Chekhov who said, "Yes, if there's a shotgun over the mantle in scene one, someone's going to get shot by scene three or
something like
act
that.
one, act three." Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when it's that, and that's the thing. I think we don't look at as writers. We are forced to look at the whole image, the whole picture, and the full taking everything and go, okay, take this part, and this part, and sometimes I love when I'm wrong. I love when I'm wrong because then it's like, hey, okay, you actually pulled one over on me. But most of the time, it's just like, really, we're going to go that predictable. But if it's not, it doesn't mean that it's that predictable for everybody. And you have to kind of check that back, just like for your wife. You may
Mhm.
sit there and say, that's not right. But for her, she was enjoying it. So as an author, sometimes we have to check ourselves,
Yeah.
which isn't always easy. But on that note, I is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to mention?
Okay, I'll mention a couple of things. So far, it would have sounded as though I only write novels, and certainly I've done my share, in this case, 18, but I also write short fiction. And I will mention just one title, The Best of Edward M. Lerner, which is a career spanning collection. And uh, as we've also given a glimpse that I have an engineering and scientific background, I write popular science. And I'm particularly proud of a book called Trope-ing the Light Fantastic, The Science Behind the Fiction. If our listeners are curious, I have a website, edwardmlerner.com, shockingly, and I'm Edward M. Lerner on LinkedIn and at Amazon. And that's it.
All right. Well, I will put your website information in the story notes, and I thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me.
When I stopped the recording with Edward, we had a little bit of a conversation, which I normally do with most of my guests. And Edward, he said that I asked him some things that he wasn't expected. He's so used to having the normal questions, and well, the interview didn't kind of go that way. And my explanation to him was, well, I have your bio in front of me, and that's it. I don't write down my questions. So whatever comes up, comes up. Rarely when I have my guests do I have those questions written out. Maybe, there's been a few that I've had notes for that I specifically looked them up and pulled out this information. But most of the time I just have a bio. And that's the one thing that you'll see me kind of sometimes trying to figure out what I want to ask. But this is the part of being on the podcast or being the host of the podcast is I have to come up with all this stuff on the fly. I have to think about it as quick as possible. And yeah, I learned some things today because you always hear the EMP. The EMP, well, it's gonna take everything down unless you have a car that's from the 70s. Well, no, that's not true. He just said it. If your car's turned off, you're good. So, I learned a little bit. And I think I think honestly, the conversation we had about tech and about different challenges that we may face in the future regarding AI and the changes how nanobots or nanotech or nanites might end up actually helping us make our healing happen quicker or actually help heal us completely. Those are all important things to think about. Granted, I may never see some of these take place in my lifetime, but there are other people that will. So when we look at the bigger picture, besides talking about his books, which his books deal with multiple topics, but they are all timely in a way. We are, as we broach in, crawl through technology. And I say crawl because kind of like he was talking about his book about the aliens hoping that the humans are going to come rescue them. Well, we haven't fully evolved, have we? We kind of have we're taking those baby steps. And yes, now that we've shifting, and I know you're going to be like, okay, Pluto's moving into Aquarius, and this is going to change things. This is going to increase that tech. This is why we're seeing the tech that we have suddenly burst onto the scene, because this is part of what Pluto and Aquarius is. It's about big tech. It's about coming together as the collective. So over the next 20 years, we're going to see tech grow. We're going to see things change, and we have to be prepared for those changes. And when we're looking at the election, which I didn't want to get political, it is true that the deep fakes are getting better. And how do we get past that? How do we see the truth? And I think that's what we all have to do, is we all have to try to face the truth of what we know and who we are and what we see in the world, because we have to start being authentic with ourselves, because there's so much fakery out there that if we're not authentic, then are we really being true to ourselves, true to the people we care about, true to the world? So where did that come from? Not quite sure, but I think it comes from we are in a time of fake in reality. So what do you want to embrace? And I'm not saying that illusions are a bad thing, but sometimes we have to embrace reality and be real, because that's where the genuine connection comes from. So on that note, if you are interested in any of Edward's books, there is a link in the bio, so please check him out. Also, as always, Rich Sai of Third Ear Audio is doing our audio. And the intro and outro songs are done by Fast Susie, and I thank them, both Rich and Fast Susie, for helping me out with the podcast. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's show, and whether you're listening in the evening, weekend, whenever, I hope you have a great day. And I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye.